Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Cade. I'm joined by my friend Andrew, and for this episode, we are going to be talking about unused movie concepts. So, Andrew, here's the first one that I think we should go over because I know how much you love this movie. It is the original Ghostbusters. So, apparently, with Dan Aykroyd's original pitch for this movie, the original title was Ghost Smashers, which, right off the bat from that, how do you feel about that title?
I think that sounds more like a cheesy beat 'em up video game than a movie. Starting off, I'm not a huge fan of this title. I think it's a little too silly and a little too ridiculous.
I understand. And apparently, the story was it had the group traveling through time, space, alternate dimensions to fight huge ghosts. And apparently, the giant marshmallow man still would have been in the film. But other than that, there was also the Ghostbusters, or Smashers in this case. They were portrayed more as Jedi Knights in this movie as opposed to working class exterminators. Which I don't know. How do you feel about that? Because in having them travel through time, space, and alternate dimensions.
Uh, I'll break this into a couple of different sections. The traveling through time, space, and alternate dimensions. I don't think that's a terrible idea. And battling various evil entities in across various planes of reality. I don't think that's a terrible idea. That sounds like a bit much for a first movie, though. I feel like that would work better for a sequel. Like, the first movie, oh, they established, oh, ghosts are real, and we got to stop this one entity, and then they'd all, in the process of defeating them, they discover that, oh yeah, we should maybe investigate where these things come from. But that just sounds like a little too much to try to cover again in a first movie of a franchise. And then as for the Jedi Knights thing, rather than just regular, lunchbox reality exterminators, it's not a terrible concept. I definitely see where they're coming from with that, but I think the idea that they're blue collar exterminators is funnier. Just because, again, it creates the idea that you put your boots on, you go to work, but you just happen to be fighting ghosts. I think that's just a funnier concept.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like that they made the change to exterminators instead of, Jedi Knight inspired characters. And I do agree that I think the whole traveling across time, space, and alternate dimensions thing, that does sound a lot better for a sequel. And yeah, not the kind of thing you'd expect from a first movie. But also, I think that doing that, do you think there might have been a chance that the movie could have been a little too all over the place because of that?
I feel like that's definitely a possibility because, again, it just seems like they're trying to cram a little too much into one movie. Though I do need to comment the fact that this version also had the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in it, I think pays credence to the fact that it was such a good comedic idea in the first place that they knew they had to use it regardless of what the movie actually ended up looking like. So I think sometimes, I don't know, I just love it when people realize they've got a great idea and decide that they're going to use it no matter what.
Oh yeah, agreed. But that's what I have for Ghostbusters. Why don't we move on to the next movie? And that is Scream 3. And this is a movie that we've already reviewed, and we kind of talked about the concept that this movie originally had, but not to the full extent. So apparently, according to Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter for Scream 1, 2, and 4, in his original story for the film, Sidney's brother, Roman Bridger, was not the killer. The killer was going to turn out to be a fan club that consisted of Woodsboro kids, and they had all formed it because of the first two Stab movies. So, right off the bat from this, I do think that this sounds like an interesting idea because it sort of feels like this following instead of just one killer or two killers. And I like the idea of it being a sort of fan club or cult inspired group of killers.
Yeah, and that's something I've mentioned in our reviews multiple times. Is something that I would have loved to see is more of a large group of killers working together or to commit murders. I think that was a twist that the Scream franchise hadn't done yet, so I would have been quite happy with that. I also, as everybody will remember from our review of Scream Free, I was not a huge fan of Roman Bridger. So the fact that he's not the killer, I find is just a great idea that they really should have gone with.
Well, and also apparently the big surprise that this movie was going to have was that none of the characters throughout the film actually died, and it would turn out that the kids had all planned and staged all of the killings, which, I mean, I see what they're going for, but do you think maybe that might have pissed off some audiences who saw the movie if that happened?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know how to that one because I feel like if I was watching that, I would have been more surprised and shocked and pissed off, but I'm not everybody. So some people may have been pissed off about that. I think that's a great idea for a concept, and that would make for a hell of a twist. The idea that, oh yeah, all these characters you thought died, like they all come together, like they all just appear out of the woodwork in the climax. I think that would have been quite the twist. Plus the fact, it goes back to the whole two twist thing from the first movie. The idea that, oh yeah, not only is it two killers, but it's two killers you really weren't expecting. In this case, it's, oh yeah, not only is it a large group of killers, but nobody actually dies. That is a really interesting idea. I would have liked to see that played out, but yeah, I don't know if that would have pissed people off. Because I mean, it is a horror movie where nobody dies, but that's not always a bad thing. I mean, look at The Conjuring. Yeah, that's just a really interesting idea. I would have liked to see them do that, actually.
And apparently, the motive that the following had was that they all wanted to achieve fame, which I mean, okay, that's fine. And I guess that Kevin Williamson kind of used this in Scream 4 with the character of Jill Roberts, the killer wanting to achieve fame.
Yeah, and Billy and Stu kind of had a similar idea in the first one, and honestly, even Robin Bridger kind of had the idea in the third one. Though, which, if it wasn't Scream 3, it must have been Scream 4. Was the idea floating around that Stu was going to come back? He was going to be confined to a wheelchair and leading a cult of killers from prison?
I think so. Yeah, I think that might be true.
Because I had heard that concept before, and I'm like, oh, that wouldn't have been a bad idea. I think that would have been an interesting twist. But this one that we're talking about here, I've never heard this concept. But again, I think it's interesting. It's out of the box. I would have quite liked to see it, if I'm being honest.
Who knows? Maybe they could use a concept similar to this for Scream 7.
Let's not talk about Scream 7. Let's not open that can of worms right now. We'll
All
save
right.
that for another time.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we move on to the next one? The next one has to do with the unmade Scooby-Doo 3 movie from the early 2000s. So I know that, like I just said, this movie wasn't made, but I think the concept that it had is really worth talking about. So this would have taken the gang away from Coolsville and it would have brought them to Scotland, which I honestly think that that's a great setting for a Scooby-Doo story.
Yeah, and it's one that hasn't been done as a live action movie. I think and anybody who grew up in the early 2000s and 2010s will remember the animated 90-minute Scooby Doo movies that were always on Cartoon Network.
Yes.
That one, they did one in Scotland where they were going after the Loch Ness Monster. But I don't know. I think it would be a cool concept. It's definitely a very different location than other places they've done. Like they did, obviously, a tropical island in the first live action, and then they did Coolsville itself for the second one. So I think another change of scenery would have been a nice choice.
Yeah, and apparently the story was going to follow the Mystery Inc. gang as they were hired by the citizens of a town out in Scotland. I'm not sure where exactly, but I'm sure we could have an idea where. And the citizens all claimed that they were being plagued by monsters in their town. But it was going to be revealed throughout the story that we would find out that the monsters were actually the true victims. So I got to tell you, I think that this actually sounds like a really unique concept. And I think that with that, portraying the monsters as the victims and the people, the citizens as the villains instead. I think that that's a sort of unique twist to the movie in that way.
Yeah, and I can't put my finger on what movie or TV show specifically used that concept, but I know that concept's been done before, and I thought it worked quite well. If I was making this, I would kind of present it as kind of like a reverse Shadow over Innsmouth. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, Cade.
I don't think I am, no.
Okay, well, without going into all the lore because we'll be here for the next 2 hours. Basically, it's an H.P. Lovecraft short story where a gentleman getting back to or kind of exploring his family tree arrives in the town of Innsmouth, Rhode Island, and does some investigating and discovers that everybody in this town belongs to this cult where they worship the fish people who come from the sea to collect human sacrifices. So I think doing something like that, but have it be in reverse, where the monsters are the more sympathetic and the villagers are the evil ones, I think would be actually a pretty cool concept for a Scooby Doo movie. Plus, I mean, I'm a big fan of the first two live action Scooby Doos, and I'm very happy to see that they're kind of getting a new wave of nostalgic fans.
Yeah, and just adding on to the story, I actually think that the idea of using real monsters instead of just fake ones would have been interesting because, they weren't just people in masks or disguises or whatnot. Well, just like the first two movies, they brought back the idea of having the gang going up against real monsters, which I've always liked, I always loved the whole who's the person under the mask idea, but I still think that this would have been a nice thing to bring back as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would have quite liked to see this happen.
But one other thing that the movie was going to explore was a subplot that followed Scooby and Shaggy as they're forced to come to terms with their own prejudices and narrow disbelief systems. So, this whole part I'm not too sure about. What are your thoughts on it?
It seems a little bit too high concept for a Scooby Doo movie. Plus, I mean, they choose the talking Great Dane and the very closeted stoner for this. I don't think that would be my first choice for, a major character development plot thread.
Yeah, I can see where you're going. All right, well, why don't we move on to the next movie? And that next movie is Batman Returns. So, with Batman Returns, the original version of this movie still included Penguin and Catwoman as the villains of the story. I don't think Max Schreck was involved, but they were still involved. But the plot was a lot different from what we got in the final film. The story saw the pair, Penguin and Catwoman, working together as they set out across Gotham to hunt down these valuable Raven statues. And once they had all the statues, it was going to lead them to a lost treasure that was hidden somewhere in Gotham City. And it would turn out at the end that the treasure was located beneath Wayne Manor, and the whole final battle between Batman and the villains would have taken place inside the Batcave. So I think that this concept is, I mean, it's an interesting take. I think it could work for a movie overall, just the overall concept, but I'm not too sure if this would have worked as a Batman movie, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, to me, this sounds more like an episode of the animated series from the 90s than a movie. Like, I don't know. I don't know. To me, it just feels like there's not enough here to stretch it out into a full length feature film. I think, again, it would work better as a TV show episode. Plus, it just feels a little too. How do I want to put this? Again, it feels too cartoony, like a whole treasure hunting plot for a Batman movie that just, I don't know, for me, that doesn't compute well.
Well, I think that the concept sounds really similar to it. Just it's funny that you say it could have been used for the animated series because this whole concept sounds similar to an episode from the Batman TV show from the 2000s, which there was an episode where Penguin and Catwoman were going after this valuable statue, or it might have been two of them. So that concept might have been adapted for that episode.
Oh, maybe because again, yeah, I can't put my finger on it. It just feels like it's not like thought out enough of a concept to fill out a feature film. I very well could be wrong, but yeah, that's just how I feel. Plus, having the final fight in the Batcave, I'm sure it would be like cinematically well done, but concept wise, I don't think that would work terribly well because then all of you got a major supervillain who knows where Batman's hideout is,
Yeah, yeah, I get what you
and
mean.
the supervillains talk. So I mean, everybody's gonna know where it is afterwards.
Yeah, I get what you mean. But apparently the film also would have saw the return of Vicky Vale, who obviously didn't return in the movie. And as it turns out, Dick Grayson would have played a role in the story as well. No Robin, just Dick Grayson, which I think that this might have been a good idea to just introduce him rather than just have him become Robin immediately. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, Vicky Vale returning as a love interest, that wouldn't have been a bad idea. I like that. And I agree. I think introducing Dick Grayson before he becomes Robin, I think would have been a better idea than just kind of having him become Robin and introduce him in the same movie. That was an issue that Batman forever has.
Oh yeah, I get what you mean. But yeah, why don't we move on to the next movie? And that, well, actually, movies that has to do with Indiana Jones 2 and 3. So looking at Temple of Doom, this movie had numerous concepts before the one that we got. One storyline had Indy discovering a hidden valley that was inhabited by dinosaurs, which I think that sounds really unique. And another one had him exploring a haunted castle out in Scotland, which, back to Scotland again. So, just with those two concepts for Temple of Doom, which one of those do you prefer, or do you think that either one of them had potential?
I mean, they both sound like they have potential. However, regarding the first one, and this is going to be a serious deep cut into the Indiana Jones lore, there was a series of books published that were basically other Indiana Jones adventures he went on that never made it into movies. And one of them was called Indiana Jones and the Dinosaur Eggs, which had him going to Mongolia to try and find the last living Triceratops. So I'm wondering, I don't remember when that book was published, but I wonder if this unused movie concept was turned into that book. I mean, obviously, it's not a direct, it's kind of a direct adaptation of this concept, but it's not the exact same. But I just find it curious that there's this unused concept and then there's that novel published that has a very similar plot. As for the exploring a haunted castle in Scotland, I mean, that's not a bad idea. I mean, we had Europe as a setting for in a couple of Indiana Jones movies. Haunted castle, I mean, it's a bit cliche, but I think it would have worked.
Well, and I think that it's interesting how they had a whole dinosaur concept, considering how Spielberg eventually went on to make Jurassic Park, right?
That is also kind of ironic, let's be honest.
And also, apparently, the reason the haunted castle concept was rejected by Spielberg is because I guess he thought that it was too similar to Poltergeist, which he had also worked on.
Okay, yeah, I can see where he's coming from on that. So it would have been like more of a horror aspect as opposed to like an adventure in a haunted castle.
Yeah, it seems that way. But also, there's a unused concept for The Last Crusade. A concept that was pitched by George Lucas was Indy searching for the Fountain of Youth. The Monkey King would have also played a role in the story as well. And we would find out that the fountain was actually a front for the Peaches of Immortality. So I think that this concept has potential, but what do you think about it? Do you think it would have landed?
I definitely think it has potential. I mean, Fountain of Youth, we kind of got that with Last Crusade. Obviously, the Fountain of Youth in this case was the Holy Grail. Monkey King, I think that would have been cool. Peaches of Immortality. Again, I'm getting a very like East Asian, Chinese mythology influence on this one, which is something that we haven't had in an Indiana Jones movie now that I think about it. We've had Indian mythology, we've had South American mythology, we've had Egyptian mythology, and we had whatever the Blue Hell Dial of Destiny was. Yeah, no, I would have liked to see that. I mean, anybody who knows Chinese mythology knows that the Monkey King is quite a fascinating character. So I think having him duel it out with Indiana Jones would have been a cool idea. Yeah, I would have liked to see this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, what we got in Last Crusade was awesome, but yeah, no, I wouldn't have mind seeing this.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing it also. So yeah, why don't we move on to the final movie on this list? And I gotta tell you, this concept surprised me the most. This is for Monsters, Inc. Yeah, I think that this concept would be unrecognizable for anyone who came across it. So the story followed a 30-year-old accountant who hates his job, and one day he would get a book from his mom with some drawings in it that he did when he was a kid. And the night he gets the book, the monsters would start showing up and nobody else would be able to see them. And he just thinks that he's starting to go crazy. But it would turn out that they are real and that he can only see them. And they would follow him to his job, on dates, etc. And we would also discover that throughout the story, the monsters are actually fears that he never dealt with as a kid. I am fascinated by this concept because if you had told me that this was the concept for Monsters Inc., I never would have believed you. So I just find this is just such fascinating. What are your thoughts on it?
Um, I really like this concept. This kind of feels like weirdly looking at it, it feels like a cross between Monsters Inc. and Soul from 2020,
Yep.
which was another Pixar movie that I really liked. But yeah, no, this if you hadn't told me in advance that this was a initial idea from Monsters Inc., I wouldn't have in a million years guessed that that was what this was pitching. Again, I like the idea. I like the kind of emotional struggle that it presents. I like the character development that it would present. I think again, like the concept we talked about a minute ago for Last Crusade, I would like to see this adapted. I think with a good animation style, I think this would be a quite fun movie.
Yeah, I think that it actually could work as a Pixar film today.
Yeah, it's just man, they're again, I would have loved to have seen the process where they went from this idea to what they finally ended up with because Monsters Inc. is a completely different freaking movie to this concept. And I love Monsters Inc., but yeah, this is again, this is chalk and cheese compared to what we actually got.
Do you think maybe all the monsters that were used in Monsters Inc., like all the designs at least, were what they had originally had for this concept, possibly?
Oh, maybe they kind of had like the monster designs first, and we're gonna go with this idea, and then they kind of figured, maybe this is a little too dark for kids with the way they were taking it, and then went with the direction that they went with, which is, what if monsters were 9 to 5 average Joes? Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong. What we got was awesome, but still, yeah, I compared to everything we've talked about today, this is the most left field concept. Again, I don't hate it. I would like to see something akin to this today. Again, I think give this a fun animation style. Actually, no. You know what this would work as? This would work as a cross between like a live action movie and a stop motion movie. Yeah, no, I like it. I don't really have too much else to say. I like this idea, but I still don't see Monsters Inc. in this. So
Yeah, I get what you mean. All right, guys, I think that that's the end of this discussion. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later. Thanks. Bye.